Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
With us now, the Cabinet Office Minister, Paymaster General Matt Hancock. He oversees the implementation of Manifesto policy. Welcome to the programme. Do you regard this manifesto as a contract with the British people, and do you intend to implement it all?
It's certainly the commitments on which we were elected. We take it incredibly seriously, and the goal is to implement it all, yeah. And as you can see there, we've got about a quarter delivered. We've had less than a year. And in fact, I really welcome this scrutiny and this project that you've been on, and we're going to implement and publish our own plans and make sure that each individual manifesto commitment has an individual minister responsible for delivering it and publish that. So in a sense, we're going to nationalise you in this process.
You're going to nationalise us?
Well, we can't afford you probably, but we're going to we're going to do this as a government.
Well, let's see if you still want to do that at the end of this interview. Your manifesto promised to scrap Labour's Human Rights Act and replace it with a British Bill of Rights. An abolition bill, you said, would be drafted within the first 100 days after the election. It didn't happen. Why?
Well, the work is in progress and internally, and in due course we'll publish it.
Why have you not kept to the timetable?
Well, the timetable of the whole manifesto is to deliver within the Parliament. So
no, but you said this would be done, the draft bill we would get to see within the first 100 days.
Well, clearly we're going to deliver against the commitment. And so, you know, I thought that was a bit harsh to call that one red. I'd call it more amber. It's clearly not delivered yet, but there's work in progress.
Well, we called it red because Mr. Gove had confirmed in December, he's the Justice Minister, that the consultation had been delayed yet again.
Well, the question is what we deliver over the 5-year Parliament. And we're less than a year in. We've got a quarter delivered, as you say, and that one is one where there's work in progress, but we're committed to doing it.
The manifesto promised to make the UK Supreme Court, quote, the ultimate arbiter of human rights in the UK. That's not going to happen, is it?
Well, this is all part of the same package which we're committed to delivering, but it'll take, you know, we're less than a year in and we've got a few years to go.
But whatever the package, the Supreme Court will not be, quote, the ultimate arbiter, will it, on human rights?
Well, that is part of the proposed package as part of the replacement of the Human Rights Act, and we'll get to that. But there's a bigger picture here, which is making sure that we deliver on the overall set of commitments in the manifesto where we're making good progress.
But you can enhance the role of the Supreme Court on human rights, I understand that, and maybe the British Bill of Rights will do that. But at the end of the day, the European Court of Human Rights is the ultimate arbiter. That's just the factual legal situation, isn't it?
Well, it all depends on the changes that you make, and as I said, we're going to bring forward a package of changes to be able to deliver against these commitments in the Parliament.
Mr. Gove says we're not now planning to derogate from the European Court of Human Rights.
Well, let's see what happens when we publish the proposals on this particular package.
All right. Let's come to immigration, where it's probably your biggest fail, I would suggest. The 2015 manifesto repeated the pledge in the 2010 manifesto to get annual net migration down to the tens of thousands. And after 5 years, far from getting it down, net immigration reached a record 336,000 last year. That is a spectacular fail.
Well, clearly, this is the commitment is to get immigration down to the tens of thousands. That remains the goal. But obviously we haven't reached it yet. I presume you didn't call that one a green. I mean, there is, but the
no,
but the commitment
is a red.
But the commitment remains because we think it's reasonable to control immigration in this country, so that while some immigration can be very good for the economy and more broadly, actually it's got to be done at a reasonable level.
But it's not just that you didn't get it down by enough. It's actually risen since you came to power. So why would you promise what you failed dismally to deliver again?
Well, I think that that's a reasonable goal, getting immigration down to the tens of thousands. And so, you know, clearly we promised it, we put it in the manifesto for a reason, to get immigration down. And we're less than a year into the Parliament, and we've got 4 years to go.
So, well, is it a goal or a pledge? Do you pledge to the British people today that net migration will be down to the tens of thousands by 2020?
Well, I pledged to fulfil what was in the manifesto on which I and every other Conservative MP was elected.
Right. Well, that pledge was to get it down to the tens of thousands. So will it be it was meant to be in the tens of thousands by 2015. It's 336,000. Will it? Is it a pledge that it will be down to the tens of thousands by 2020?
Well, there's a whole series of actions that we're taking, not least the EU renegotiation, to try to tackle immigration and make sure that it's brought down to a reasonable level. But again, there's a broader point. Of the 160-odd commitments that you're measuring, we've delivered on a quarter of them. Of course, some are quicker than others to deliver on, it's fair to say.
Okay.
But the whole point of having the manifesto and then tracking it as we are doing is to make sure we know where we're up to against these commitments.
Well, let's come on to the European negotiations, because that was in the manifesto too. And it looks like you're going to deliver on the referendum, perhaps even this year. But the manifesto promised several key things in the renegotiation: a 4-year ban on EU migrants claiming in-work benefits, a new residency requirement for social housing, and no child benefit for EU migrants if their children live abroad. And the draft deal contains none of these things.
Well, firstly, as you say, the centrepiece of our European policy in the manifesto was to have the referendum, and we'll be having the referendum. So although you call that amber, it's absolutely certainly going to happen.
I understand that, but none of the things were meant to be that you said we'd get to vote on in this referendum have been delivered in the draft settlement.
Well, we then set out what we wanted to negotiate, and that negotiation is not yet, as you know, is not yet complete. We've got a lot of work to do this week to get the best possible deal that we can, and then I hope that we'll have a good deal and be able to vote to stay in a reformed Europe.
But
That's the goal.
mention. Now, there is a version of the ban on EU migrants benefits. There is no child benefit. There's now going to be 28 different child benefits across Europe that Britain will pay. But there's no mention at all of residency requirement for social housing. There's no mention of social housing in the deal, so that's gone.
Look, we don't know what the outcome of this negotiation will be until the end of this week. There's a week of hard work on the European renegotiation to get a deal, but there's a bigger picture point here.
But social housing is not on the agenda.
Well, let's see. Let's see what we get in this deal over the next week. But there's a bigger point here, which is that we said that we'd have the renegotiation. Lots and lots of people said you're never going to get these things on the table at all. The question of in-work benefits and child benefit was, we were told you couldn't even put that on the agenda. The discussion in Europe this week is exactly how far we go on those. And people said that we couldn't deliver anything in this space, and we've managed to deliver already in the draft deal a lot, and we'll see where we end up.
But not what's in the manifesto.
We'll see where we end up at the end of this week.
We will indeed. And I hope you'll be coming back too, not necessarily next week, but in the weeks ahead to go through this. Let's move on to the economy. You've put into law a charter for budget responsibility. It commits you now to running a surplus by 2020. So it's a kind of legal obligation as well as a policy. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says that will likely require either tax rises or spending cuts as yet unannounced. Do you agree with that?
Well, not in the latest financial forecast put out by the Office for Budget Responsibility, who independently advise on these. And we've got a budget in just over a month's time, so we'll see what the figures say then. But clearly, in the latest forecast from the government, yes, we hit that surplus. And we're going to, I voted for it.
The surplus.
We've hit it in the forecast, as I said, as in its forecast to
change
come
all the
through.
time.
They do, as the economy changes. Look, but there's again, on the economic front, there was an awful lot in the manifesto on that. It's all about economic security, generating jobs, in the same way that the national security ones were all about national security. And those were the two elements at the heart of this manifesto that we were elected on. And I would say that we're delivering very strongly on both, in terms of the big picture of what you're getting from the message that we said that we were going to deliver at the election.
Let me come down to the smaller but still very important picture. You have a legal obligation to reach a surplus by 2020. If to reach that surplus you had to raise tax, would you?
Well, look, much as I'd love to, I'm not going to set tax policy on
No, but
a
it's a
Sunday
principle
morning.
that
You
to
know,
meet a legal obligation, if it required tax increases, would there be tax increases?
Well, we've set out the plans, and the plans hit a surplus. And so, we did that in the autumn statement in November. Clearly, the economy changes all the time, and internationally, people have seen the falls in the stock market in the last few months. But we'll have a budget in more than a month's time. But
Well,
I voted to have that surplus,
I know.
and that is clearly what we set out to do.
It was government policy, but you promised a lower tax society.
Yeah.
And yet on the forecast, which you've just been saying, the overall tax burden is rising. It's rising as a percentage of GDP. And on the forecast, tax, not the buoyancy, but extra tax that you've introduced will be 50 billion higher. So you have previous on this. You could raise taxes again, because you already have.
Well, clearly there are some areas where we have tightened things up, especially on tax avoidance, and we took an extra 5 billion from tax avoidance measures, but also
But the 50 billion's in addition to that.
But we've reduced the tax burden on people, especially people in lower wage jobs, where they're going to get the national minimum wage, but we're well on the way to the Manifesto commitment of making sure you don't have to pay any income tax until you earn 12,500. Again, that's one where we've made progress,
and you're
but
on
there's
the way.
more to do.
You're on the way, I understand that. The manifesto talks about, and I quote, reducing the tax relief on pension contributions for people earning more than £150,000. That's people on the 45%, the highest income tax bracket, that your manifesto says you're going to cut the tax relief on their pension contributions. That's all it says. So if you were also to cut the tax relief of those on the 40% rate, that would be breaching the manifesto.
Well, there we've done what we've said that we would do in the manifesto. So we've followed the manifesto clearly in terms of the commitment that it made. Look, outside the manifesto, there's always going to be other things that you do.
Yes,
you could,
but
for instance,
on pension tax relief, you were explicit that it would be those in the 45% wouldn't get it. You didn't mention any other bracket. The implication is it's only the 45. If you now took away or cut the tax relief of the 40% tax payers, that would be a broken manifesto commitment.
That's not how I see it. You can add things to the manifesto. Look at the whole prison reform programme, a massive radical prison reform programme, which wasn't in our manifesto because we've built it up as a proposal since then. And likewise, the Prime Minister's speech on social mobility and on tackling unjust inequalities in the party conference. We've done a huge amount on that over the autumn,
Well, and we're going
in addition to what's in the manifesto. So delivering on the manifesto commitments is absolutely essential.
Well,
but it
okay,
isn't
let me
the
come to
only
it.
thing that you do in government,
No,
because
but
you respond to events and you develop new policies as well.
Is to hold your manifesto to
Of course.
account. Hunting. When will you give Parliament the chance to repeal the Hunting Act?
We're committed to doing that.
But when?
Well, we're committed to doing it in this Parliament. So we looked at doing it early on, as everybody knows.
That.
We decided not to do it then, but that's something that we're committed to.
And you set a target of £1 trillion of exports by 2020.
Yeah.
Most forecasters, including your own OBR, say you'll be at least 350 billion short. So can we agree you won't hit that target?
It's fair to say that that is a stretching target, but it remains our target, our aspiration, and an awful lot.
But you'll miss it.
There's an awful lot of work going into achieving it.
You and I both know you're going to miss it.
There's an awful lot of work going into achieving it, Andrew.
Very well. Matthew Hancock, thank you for that. Come back and we'll see progress in the months ahead.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it